my name is Wes, and this is episode 2 of Drive Standard, my little vlog of sorts. So, where did we leave off last time? I think I was kind of trying to figure out where I wanted to go with kind of the next episode and whatnot. So, this time around, I figured I'd kind of go over car history, sort of what I grew up driving, that sort of thing, how I ended up where I am now with the Fit and the Subaru. Let's see, where do we start? So, when I was probably, I want to say maybe like 14 or so, I used to turn around my aunt's car when she would come to visit in my grandparents' yard. She would say, "Hey, go turn around the car." So I'd take the keys, go out, turn the car around. That was my first experience with a actual automobile. Up until that point, it had pretty much just been go-karts, really. Go-karts and a moped. So, and that was let me see, what did she have at that point? It was a Pontiac Grand Am. So this was like mid-90s, somewhere around there, one of those styles. So, anyway, then the first car I actually drove after I got my permit, learner's permit, was early 2000s or so. I don't remember exactly, but it was a Chevy Venture minivan. Embarrassingly enough, that was the first thing I actually drove on the road. Drove that about halfway home from the driver's license center. Pretty much trained on that. And then the other car that ended up actually kind of becoming more so my car was a 1998 Escort SE wagon, which is kind of where my love for station wagons came from, was actually with that car. I loved everything about it. I thought station wagons were great, and I drove that car my entire senior year of high school. And then when I went to college, I really didn't have a need for a car, so it stayed at home with my parents. They used it and stuff, and then my little brother would use it occasionally and stuff like that when he wasn't up at school too, and all that good stuff. So, basically a couple years went by. My brother had pretty much adopted that car full-time then, so it wasn't really mine anymore. I was heading into like my senior year of college and stuff, and had nothing essentially. So I really wanted to get something. So I had this love affair of the older style Ford Escorts, which was probably driven along by the European Escort Cosworth. That thing, of course, if you know anything about the Escort Cosworth that was built for rally and stuff like that, the thing was just this beast of a machine. And the second generation Escorts that we got here in the United States were kind of, they were nowhere remotely similar to them, but they were as close as we could really get. So we picked up a 1996 Escort LX. It was a two-door. It was considered, the poor man's GT, because they also did make a GT model of that car, which had a dual overhead cam, 1.8 liter motor that had a significant amount more horsepower than the 1.9 liter single overhead cam that came in the normal Escorts. It was good for maybe 88 horsepower from the factory, so I didn't really go anywhere quickly in that 96 Escort, but it was actually a lot of fun to drive. It was also happened to be my first stick shift car, which was great. So I had a ton of fun driving that around. It got it got insanely good fuel economy somehow. I would crank out easily upper 30s, sometimes in the 40s, with that motor, which was amazing considering it was a 1.9 liter, and then you look at this fit here, and it takes a 1.5 liter to actually hit those kind of numbers. So anyway, had the LX for a little while. It eventually started leaving me stranded places because it liked to break down, because that's what I can only assume a lot of old Fords did. It seemed like once you hit like 90,000 miles on a Ford car, they would just fall apart. And that ended up actually happening with that 98 wagon as well. When my brother finally traded that in, it had been nickel and diming my family since it had, like, I don't know, 60, 70,000 miles on it. He traded it in at like 90,000. But yeah, like everything was replaced on it, like everything but the engine. So yeah, so I had the LX. It had an engine replacement so that I could kind of like finish school and still have a car and all that crap. But yeah, so then after I graduated, drove it to my first job, first, I guess, real job, and eventually it started giving me problems again, things starting to break, and then it started stalling and stuff, and left me in an intersection, dead in an intersection, and I pretty much had enough at that point. So started looking around, was actually really considering buying a Focus, like a, probably 2009 or a 2010, one of those models of the Focus. So not like the new ones like you see now, but it was kind of that like in-between generation. And I thought, that'd be really cool. I'm coming from Fords. I was like, they're a lot of fun. They get good gas mileage, blah, blah, blah. So, went to some local Ford dealers, and nobody had any manuals. I knew they made them in manuals, but nobody really got any. So there were pretty much none on the lots. So I wound up not being able to get a manual transmission Focus. And what happened was, while I was looking around at one particular dealer, there was a white station wagon chilling out on the lot, and that of course intrigued me a lot, being a big fan of station wagons. So go over to check it out. Lo and behold, it's a Subaru, a Legacy wagon to be exact. It was a 2006 Legacy wagon, and I thought, I have to try this. So test drove it, fell in love with it immediately. It was this eye-opening experience, because I had never felt a car that felt so put together and so sturdy, and just, it was a completely different feel from any of the Fords I had driven, small Ford cars at that point. So, long story short, bought the car, tiny down payment, because, I was just starting to work, but I desperately needed a car that wasn't going to leave me stranded, and had the Subaru. At the same time, my, at the time, fiance had a ZX2, Escort ZX2, and, that was fine for the time being. It got, decent gas mileage and everything, and, yeah, then, let's see, what did we do at that point? So then I guess we moved in together, we got an apartment, and, ooh, this is going to be tricky. Yay, I love merge points. Ugh. Well, let's see if anybody lets me filter in. So, yeah, where was I? ZX2. So, had that for a little while. Then, after my wife and I had gotten married, we, went about the business of making a family, and we decided the two-door Escort was no longer going to cut it. So we loved my Legacy so much, we were like, well, you know what, we need another we need another Subaru. So started looking, eventually came across a 2007 Outback Sport. At the time, my wife didn't want another manual, but I was like, we have to. The Legacy was not a manual, and that was really the only mark against it in my mind. So we wound up test driving and purchasing a 2007 Outback Sport, and still have it to this day, which is awesome. The Legacy, on the other hand, which it makes me so sad. So we wound up being affected by the thing that most people who, I guess, pay a lot of attention to Subaru stuff know about, but the head gaskets. Of course, I didn't really know about the issue that the older, let me see, what motors were they? Were those the EJ, the 2.5 liters? I don't know, whichever, moniker they were, I'm not entirely sure, but head gaskets were leaking on both of the cars. And, I'm fairly handy, but definitely not handy enough to take apart an engine and do that sort of stuff. So it would, without a doubt, have to go to, go to a mechanic, dealership, whatever, to get fixed. So 2 cars, both with probably close to, $3,000 to $4,000 worth of repairs, wasn't going to happen. Just absolutely was not going to happen. We couldn't afford it, and so reluctantly, I kind of made the call, I like tiny, efficient cars, or at least I thought I did, and I was like, you know what, let's get a new car. We'd never owned a brand new car. We'd always bought pre-owned and stuff like that, so I figured the Legacy was almost paid off. That was another thing that really hurt, was it was almost paid off, and, had a decent amount of value still left on it. Probably I traded it in for probably close to $7,000 or $8,000, which I thought was incredible for, I owned it for like 6 years or so. And, considering my Escort, when I traded that in, I only got $300 for it. I thought this was incredible, but traded that in, picked up the Fit, and then that's when the, sadness set in, because I don't love this car definitely as much as I did the Legacy. But yeah, that's pretty much the whole story of my cars. Obviously, like I said before, the Impreza's still around. We plan on keeping that thing until it pretty much has to be, towed out of our driveway, I guess. Even then, I'll probably try and get it fixed still. But I guess since I covered all that, probably I could move on to the next thing. I was planning on doing like a maybe mini review of the Fit. Of course, I think it's impossible for me to do a unbiased review because I compare pretty much everything to my Legacy, which I know isn't fair, but oh well, it's going to happen. But so let's see. Let's start with positives. So obviously, first and foremost, most people buy a Fit for fuel economy, and that it does very well. Depending on how I drive, where I drive. Obviously, right now, I'm not doing so great. This section of road, unfortunately, is pretty garbage in the evenings on my way home. What is it saying now? We got 29.5 miles per gallon. So, I mean, I would barely get that driving 100% highway in the Legacy, so that's, 1 point to the Fit there. So it does get incredibly good gas mileage. When I do cruise on the highway with this thing, I mean, I can get very, very close to 50 miles to the gallon. Coming home, if I go home not during a rush hour time, I think the last time I tried that, I averaged 48. So yeah, it definitely does very well in that regard. The only problem is it feels a little dead. It's kind of dull, I guess you could say, which I guess kind of is in line with how I hear a lot of people talk about Honda stuff nowadays. You know, this being the first Honda I've ever owned, it's also, you know, kind of left sort of a bad taste in my mouth because, yeah, there really is not a ton of feel, I guess. Everything just kind of feels bleh. But let's see. Well, I did say I was going to do positives. What are the positives? Well, it's light, so that helps with the fuel economy. So, you know, it goes around corners fairly well, I guess. You know, it's no all-wheel drive. Man, I tell you, I can't really come up with good points. Oh, well, okay, good point. Back seat. So, I have a 3-year-old, so obviously you got one of those big, massive car seats, but that's the one thing about this. The rear doors on this car open like almost 90 degrees. It's kind of crazy. So you have a ton of room to be able to get into the back seats, and there's a huge amount of leg room. There's so much leg room in the back of this thing. In my driving position, I mean, I'm 6 feet tall, so my seat's not, you know, it's not very far forward. It's, you know, more towards the back. And when I sit behind my seat, you know, my knees don't come close to touching the seat. So in that regard, it's definitely great. It's much easier to get the car seat in and out of this car than it is the Impreza. The Impreza, we have to keep the car seat in the center of the car, just so my son actually has room for his, you know, feet to move around and stuff like that. But this car, I would put him in the middle, but then the other weird thing is there's like a weird hump kind of on the middle seat. So the car seat kind of wobbles a bit, so it ends up working out better if the car seat is on, you know, either the, you know, left or right side, kind of in the dip, kind of where the butt would go. So it holds in a little better that way. But I mean, yeah, it's got these crazy seats that fold up. Like the seat bottom lifts up, like to stand up vertically, which is cool. So you can kind of stand somewhat tall stuff in here. You know, they fold down nearly flat. So yeah, I mean, it's fairly versatile. Can't fit anything like huge in here. But you know, it does. It's fine. But the problem is, there's so many negatives that I run into with this thing after having it now for like a year and a half. I mean, first thing, just looking out the front, you know, with the way that a lot of new cars are doing this really like sweeping windshield, your A-pillars are, you know, at a pretty severe angle, and because of that, they have to be pretty thick. And because of that, the visibility in this car is terrible. The left and right out the rear of the car, where in the Impreza or my Legacy, you know, you could look out those windows and see kind of everywhere behind you. You've got like this just big panel on either side that you just can't see. And I mean, if it wasn't for the camera in this thing, it's kind of like, ugh. So rear visibility is not the best. Forward visibility, these A-pillars are so thick that, I mean, I've almost, you know, turned left in front of someone, especially like if an intersection isn't directly across from you, and it's kind of off to like, well, in my case, the intersection that it happened at was slightly off to the left-hand side. An entire car, just being across an intersection, was able to hide behind the A-pillar, and I couldn't see, and even with a little bit of head movement. So, I don't know, it's just, you really have to get used to it, I guess, if you really do like the car. I don't know. I'm willing to endure some efficiency loss as far as, you know, coefficient of drag and all that stuff, to have a windshield that's a little more, you know, a little more straight up and down and not so thick A-pillars. So that's that gripe. The other thing, when we got this car, I noticed there's some panels like up in the dash and stuff. They're like weirdly not aligned or like where they're supposed to be. So I don't know. It's very strange. What else? I mean, the gauges are good. They're easy to read, pretty clear and stuff. You don't get a temperature gauge, which I don't know. It always weirded me out. I know Subaru went that direction a little while back. They got rid of the temperature gauge in favor of like a miles per gallon fuel efficiency thing, which seems silly. But so this car doesn't have that either. You just kind of get like a little blue engine coolant light thing when it's, you know, when you start it in the cold and whatnot, and then it goes away once it's warmed up. Steering wheel's fine. It's got, you know, all these buttons all over it for your volume and a little bit of infotainment controls, but pretty much like most cars, this touchscreen system is probably one of the worst things I've ever used. I mean, if you're used to any kind of actual like tablet, whether it be an iPad or in our case, you know, I have a Nexus 7 at this point, it's so bad. The UI, and well, yeah, and see, this is the thing that bugs me the most. So like I'm a web designer by profession, so when I see interfaces like, you know, I'm obviously not going to go paging through all the menus now, but just, I don't know, just the design of stuff really bugs me, and just the interaction and how small some of the buttons are. It's very hard to use at times. It's very laggy, and yeah, it's just not not the greatest thing. And the Bluetooth menu for like connecting phones and stuff is terrible. It's so hard to like connect another phone if you've already got one connected. It's weird. Sometimes it'll be like, oh, I'll connect, you know, just audio from one phone, but then like the phone, like, I don't know, it's tough to describe. It's like it'll take phone calls on one phone, but play like Pandora on another phone. It won't actually like move both audio systems over, and I don't know. It's just so bad. Whenever my wife and I ride together, we always end up just one of us turns off Bluetooth and then the other person turns it on, and it's a mess. Then what else? So like I mentioned earlier, this thing is a 1.5 liter. It is a very noisy engine. This thing is so buzzy. It's a very metallic-y, buzzy engine, I guess. I'm so used to, you know, I've been driving the Subaru 2.5 liter for so long that now that I'm in this tiny little, you know, inline 4-cylinder, it's so buzzy. It's just very, very buzzy. In the words of the great Jeremy Clarkson, it's a very busy little engine. Yeah, that being said, you know, a highway, if you're doing like 65, this thing will be turning like 3,500 RPM or something like that. It's just going like crazy. So that's not the greatest. And even being a 6-speed, it seems odd that they chose to put such short gear ratios on it, but and that kind of moves into like a personal preference. I actually, now that I've driven a 6-speed, I kind of prefer 5 speeds better. I don't know, there's just something about being able to wind a gear out longer that I seem to like a little bit better. I don't know. It just feels like I have to like shift too many times with this thing and not sort of get the cruising, you know, speed I want. But yeah, sometimes the shifter is like twitchy. I know a lot of people claim that, you know, Honda makes some of the best manual transmissions ever, but I don't know. I guess it's probably just a personal thing, but I don't know. I don't always like it. And even the shifter, it's very, very clicky and stuff like that. I guess, I don't know. Maybe because it's brand new and I'm just not used to, well, I say brand new, but year and a half old, but I don't know. It's just something about it. I don't know. I haven't been able to really get a good liking to it. Like when we first bought it, it was really tricky for me to use because I was used to kind of the more like in the Impreza, you had to be a lot more diligent in your shifts. You know, you had to get everything matched up, blah, blah, blah. This thing, the engine always felt like it wouldn't even give you enough time to shift gears before it would like drop RPMs like way too quickly. So the only way that I was able to like adapt to driving this car was to basically teach myself to shift even faster. So if you're not good at shifting quickly, I'd say stay away from this manual transmission on this car, because yeah, it's tricky. And then what else? I mean, I don't know. The knobs they just feel kind of cheap. I don't know. I mean, yeah, they're plastic, but so are the ones in my Legacy, but they didn't feel nearly as cheap. And the selector knob, it's so hard to turn. It seems like unusually hard to turn. But I don't know. I mean, there's not too much else past that. I mean, you got your auto up and down, window, which is cool, and all that. But, that's the car. Obviously, my tone, I'm about it. But it is what it is. Eventually, I'll get myself a Subaru again, like this beautiful. What do we have in front of us here? Is this a WRX? Yeah. But we'll get something again. I'll get my all-wheel drive back. But, so I think that's all I'm going to go over today. Hopefully it wasn't too mind-numbingly boring. But that was my history of cars and kind of my thoughts on the Fit, however sour they are. But until next time, remember to always row your own. See you later.